In the summer of 1943, the world witnessed the largest tank battle in history. Two colossal forces, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, clashed near the small city of Kursk in southwestern Russia. It was a battle that would change the course of World War II, a battle that would forever reshape the Eastern Front. Over 2 million men, 6,000 tanks, and 4,000 aircraft collided in an epic struggle for supremacy. But how did this titanic struggle unfold? And why was the Battle of Kursk one of the most decisive moments of World War II? Get ready to witness the fury, the strategy, and the sheer scale of the battle that sealed the fate of the German war machine. Chapter 1. The Road to Kursk. By 1943, Nazi Germany was on the defensive. After their crushing defeat at Stalingrad, the German war machine had lost its momentum. But Adolf Hitler wasn't ready to give up his ambitions in the East. Hitler believed that a decisive victory at Kursk could turn the tide of war in Germany's favor. His plan, codenamed Operation Citadel, was bold but risky, a massive pincer movement to encircle Soviet forces in the Kursk salient and cripple their ability to launch further offensives. But the Soviets knew what was coming. Thanks to intelligence from the Lucy spy ring, they had advance warning of the German plans. Soviet General Georgy Zhukov recommended a strategic defensive plan, luring the Germans into a well-prepared trap. For months, the Soviets fortified their positions around Kursk. They dug trenches, laid vast minefields, and prepared a series of defensive belts designed to slow and wear down the advancing German forces. This was no ordinary defense. It was a death trap for the German tanks. Chapter 2. Operation Citadel. On July 5, 1943, the German attack began. Operation Citadel was unleashed with a massive artillery barrage, followed by waves of tanks and infantry. The Germans sent their best, panzer divisions, including the fearsome Tiger tanks, along with air support from the Luftwaffe. The Germans hoped for a swift breakthrough, aiming to encircle the Soviet forces in a matter of days. But the Soviets were ready. The first German wave slammed into the Soviet defensive lines, only to be met with fierce resistance. The Soviets had laid over 1 million mines across the battlefield, creating deadly obstacles for the German tanks. As the panzers advanced, they found themselves bogged down in minefields and subjected to relentless artillery fire. The once unstoppable German war machine began to grind to a halt. Chapter 3. The Battle for the Skies. While the battle raged on the ground, another critical fight was taking place in the skies above Kursk. The Luftwaffe had concentrated its remaining forces in an attempt to gain air superiority over the battlefield. On July 5th, the opening day of the battle saw the single costliest day in the history of aerial warfare. The Luftwaffe launched thousands of sorties, but the Soviets had strengthened their air defenses and deployed a formidable force of fighter planes and ground attack aircraft. The Soviets used planes like the Il-2 Sturmovik to devastating effect, targeting German tanks and infantry. Though the Luftwaffe initially gained local air superiority, the Soviet Air Force soon began to wear down the Germans in a war of attrition. Chapter 4. The Southern Clash. On July 12th, one of the most iconic tank battles in history took place, the Battle of Prokhorovka. It was here on the southern side of the Kursk salient that the full force of Germany's panzers collided with the Soviet army. The Germans had hoped to break through the Soviet lines and encircle their forces. What they didn't expect was the sheer number of Soviet tanks waiting for them. Over 800 tanks clashed in a brutal, chaotic battle. The battle was intense, with tanks fighting at point-blank range in the dust and smoke. The Soviet T-34s swarmed the German Tigers, using their speed and numbers to overwhelm the heavier but slower German tanks. Despite the superior armor and firepower of the German panzers, the Soviet strategy of close-range combat nullified their advantages. Chapter 5. The Soviet Counteroffensive. While the Germans struggled to break through, the Soviets were ready for their next move. After stalling the German advance, they launched a massive counteroffensive. On July 12th, the same day as the Battle of Prokhorovka, The Soviets unleashed Operation Kutuzov, a powerful strike against the Germans on the northern side of the Kursk salient. Operation Kutuzov aimed to drive the Germans back and relieve the pressure on Kursk. The Soviets threw everything they had into the fight: tanks, artillery, and waves of infantry. The German forces, exhausted and depleted, began to fall back. This was a turning point. The Soviets had not only stopped the German offensive, but they had also seized the initiative. From this point on, the Germans would never again be able to mount a major offensive on the Eastern Front. Chapter 6. The End of the Battle. By mid-July, it was clear that the German offensive had failed. Hitler, facing pressure from the Allied invasion of Sicily, called off the operation. The Germans had lost tens of thousands of men, hundreds of tanks, and much of their ability to continue fighting on the Eastern Front. The Battle of Kursk was over, and the Soviet Union had won a decisive victory. It was a victory not just of arms, but of strategy. The Germans had been lured into a trap, and their once feared panzer divisions had been shattered. For the Soviets, the victory at Kursk marked a new phase of the war. They now held the strategic initiative and would continue to push the Germans westward, eventually driving them out of Soviet territory and all the way to Berlin. Chapter 7. Legacy of the Battle. The Battle of Kursk was a defining moment in World War II. It was the last major offensive the Germans would launch on the Eastern Front, and it marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. The battle also demonstrated the importance of preparation, intelligence, and defensive depth. The Soviet Union, once on the brink of collapse, had turned the tide of the war and would eventually emerge victorious over Nazi Germany. The story of Kursk is one of courage, sacrifice, and strategy, a battle that truly shaped the fate of the world. The Battle of Kursk was not just the largest tank battle in history. It was the moment when the tide of war turned for good. The fate of millions hung in the balance. In the end, the Soviets emerged victorious, and the course of history was forever changed. Subscribe and follow to explore more epic stories of World War II, where history was written in fire and steel.